Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. All right. Welcome to the Mikestand. Um, today is Tuesday, April 29th. So we just got today and tomorrow, and then we're done with April. We'll be one third of the way through 2025. Hopefully, everybody's having a good year thus far. Hopefully, everybody's having a good week thus far. We get ready to head into May here. Um, So of course, we're going to give it a couple minutes to give people a chance to come in. If you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people in here to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and/or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. And with that being said, um, let's see. As I said, we'll wait, give people a chance to come in. Um, okay, so let's see now. Alrighty then. Okay, so now we're at 2.5 minutes here. Yeah, so as I've been watching, cartoons in the afternoons, of course, my little playlist, as it were, did actually get around to watching Popeye meet Sinbad the Sailor today. That was a pretty cool one to look at. All right, so now we're getting up to the 3 minute mark. It looks like we have some people in here. So here's what's on tap for tonight. I've got a couple articles to go over from Bounding into Comics, both anime related. Um, One of them talking about how localizers are changing up the script on an anime called Blue Box. And then we've got an update on an adapt on a sensory situation for anime adaptation of My Hero Academia Vigilantes. We also will have the wrestling wrap up, in which we'll talk a bit about. Of course, we'll look back to last night's Monday Night Raw. Look ahead to we'll look ahead to what's going to be going down on tonight's NXT, and then we'll finish things off with this day in each history. So with all that being said, why don't we go ahead and get started then? Let me pull up, of course, the first article we're going to go over tonight here. So I can find the cursor, of course. Get right into it. Alright, and as I said, if you guys haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to all right, hold on. Yeah, I'm gonna stop share screen for a moment here. For whatever reason, that thing was being a little stubborn. All right, so let's get into this first article here. Oh, wait. Oops. All right, so they did make a slight adjustment there. All right, so here we go. Here's the article we're looking at for tonight. Let's see, the first one here. All right. So, Netflix localizers rewrite Blue Box English script, sees character complimented for being feminist, in smaller quotes, instead of feminine. Article by Nerdigans Inc., published on April 28th, which of course was yesterday. So let's take a look at this. So, in the latest case of English language localizers overriding a Japanese creator's original creative vision, Netflix's in-house team has edited a bit of dialogue in Blue Box to have someone who was originally compliment who was to have someone who was originally okay. I think that's supposed to be complimented, not compliment, for having a feminine in parentheses here perspective instead receive praise for being feminist. Yeah, there is a bit of a difference, I believe, in feminine and feminist. I think there is somewhat of a difference there. So, written and illustrated by I Love You, My Teacher, mangaka Koji Mira, Blue Box is a slice of life rom-com romantic comedy centering on the day-to-day life activities of Amy High School badminton player Taiki Inomata, who, after spending ages pining for senior basketball player Shinatsu Kano, finds his world turned upside down after Shinatsu's parents leave for an extended business trip, and she ends up moving into his parents' house. Oh boy. Every guy's fantasy, right? The girl you have a crush on, her parents move away, and she ends up staying with you as a house guest. That's something that's kind of. In late 2024, the series began to receive an anime adaptation from TMS Entertainment and Telecom Animation Film. Its English dubbing rights eventually secured by Netflix. To this end, with the release of the first season's second half on April 18th, English language fans discovered a particularly odd change made to a bit of dialogue in the series' 16th episode, Unfair Woman. Therein, with preparations for their school's culture festival find themselves in full swing, Taiki's childhood friend, Hina Inomoto, who's voiced in the Japanese by Akari Kito, who provides the voice of Nezuko Kamado in Demon Slayer, can be seen struggling to rehearse her lines for the lead role in Class 1B's upcoming rendition of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So that's Hina right there. Pink hair and all. Pink hair, pink shirt, white blouse. Hey, if it shows up. Again, if you can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the question best my ability. So, anyways, getting back to the article here. In both the anime and manga, after taking notice of her frustrations, her friend Kyo Kishara, who is voiced in the Japanese by Chiaki Kobayashi, provides the voice of Shiunji in the Shiunji Family Children, steps in to help, proceeding to recite the forgotten dialogue and admit that while he doesn't particularly care for acting, he was still able to memorize the lines simply by listening to Hina repeat them over and over. Impressed by his skills, Hina suggests Kyo should have gone out for a role in the class play, only for her friend to promptly decline. Explaining his aversion to the stage, Kyo admits that he's, quote, no good at cheesy romance like that, unquote, as while he can sympathize with a heroine, quote, being struck by misfortune and hardship, unquote, he, quote, can't abide by her just up and marrying some random prince, unquote. So the guy in the glasses there is Kyo right there. In Miura's original manga, Kyo's reflection is met by the acknowledgement from Hina, quote, that's a surprisingly feminine perspective, unquote. Her further aside of, quote, I thought the love aspect wasn't going to interest you, unquote, implying that she was taken aback by his romantic view of the situation. Hmm. However, in Netflix's English dub script, Hina instead observes, quote, that's very feminist, unquote, thus implying that Kyo's take was based more on gender equality than the concept of romance. Yeah, I think, yeah, and I can get where Nerdigans is going with this. You know, the different, again, we said that there is a difference between using the term feminine and feminist. Okay, feminine is just basically having the perspective of a woman, or taking into account the perspective of a woman, looking at it from the woman's point of view. Feminist is somebody who basically would sit there and defend more the idea, as they said, gender equality. Feminist is somebody who would stand up for, a woman to speak out for herself, rather than just relying on somebody to come along and save her, So I can see where Nerdigans is kind of going with that, with her statement, how they're changing the author's original intent, which I think in a slice of life magazine, in a slice of life story like that, that's kind of a key thing, because that does, in essence, change the whole concept of the situation. It changes the context of the situation. It goes from being a situation where he's looking at it more from a woman's perspective to now he's standing up and saying that the woman shouldn't just wait around. It's like it's a completely different context there. Let's see. By a poster I made of the buckler via Kofi. Oh, fine. In parentheses here, interestingly, While the English subtitles for the Japanese track were originally consistent with the manga, it appears that they have since been updated, as they now bear feminist rewrite. Unparenthesed. As of writing, neither Netflix, TMS Entertainment, Shueisha, or Miura herself have issued a comment addressing the line change. Probably, well, Netflix, the people at Netflix probably are okay with it because they're obviously trying to push woke ideologies. My guess is the people at TMS, Shueisha, and Miura may not even know that it's happened yet. They may not have even known that it's happened yet because usually they don't find out till much later. So usually somebody like asks them, "Hey, is this what you meant to say in this?" That's usually something they don't usually find out till much later. But further, it is currently unknown which specific individuals worked on this script. Sadly, this is far from the first time Netflix has made such an ideologically motivated edit to a piece of the Japanese media, having made similar changes to scripts in Tiger and Bunny, One Piece, and even Godzilla Minus One. So, with that, so there we go. There's that article. So we're done with that article. Well, let's get ready to move on to the next article then. Here's the next article we're going to look at. All right. My Hero Academia Vigilantes anime adaptation censors Pop Step's idol-inspired costume. So we have another kind of censoring situation here. Article by Nerdigans Inc. published April 28th, which was yesterday. So here we go. Let's take a look at this now. While Studio Bones take on the My Hero Academia spin-off, My Hero Academia Vigilantes is among the most anticipated of the stacked spring anime season, fans of the original manga will no doubt be disappointed to learn that the adaptation has censored the costume appearance of the series' female lead, the idol vigilante Pop Step. Let's see. Yeah, they probably found it too risque. But based on the manga of the same name by writer Hideyuki Furuhashi and artist Batten Court, Vigilantes is set prior to the events of Kohei Horikoshi's main My Hero Academia series and follows a trio of unlicensed heroes in Naruhata as they team up to investigate the underground trade surrounding the quirk-enhancing drug known as Trigger. Making up this de facto team are series lead Koichi the Crawler Hamawari, who is voiced in the Japanese by Chuichiro Umeda, who provides the voice of Hikaru Indo in The Summer Hikaru Died. Former hero turned quirkless vigilante Iwao Knuckle Duster Oguro, who is voiced in the Japanese by Yasuhiro Mamiya. who provides the voice of Gigantomachia in My Hero Academia. So here's somebody they brought over from the main series to do a voice in this series, this spin-off series. And the team's sole female member, the idol-themed Kazuho Pop Step Hanayama, who is voiced in the Japanese by Ikumi Hasegawa, who provides the voice of Ikyo Kita in Bocchi the Rock. So there's kind of the the group right there. Given her motif, it should come as no surprise that Popstep's costume plays heavily into the prosperity for, or the propensity for female idols to perform in particularly risque costumes, with the heroine leaping into battle wearing lifted knee-high boots, heavy makeup, and a black unitard, with a quote-unquote scandalous rear view. Now, mind you, for such high activity, yes, this costume choice is considered risque, but it's also practical for what they're doing, considering there is a lot of physicality there. Yeah, you don't. The lack of the quote lack of clothing isn't as much to perpetuate or show off anything overly sexual. It's a practical aspect, because you don't have as much. One, you don't have as much in the way of cloth weighing you down, for one thing, and you also with the lesser amount of clothes taking up, of course, a lesser amount of space, it gives you more natural, maneuverability and mobility there, right? So I'm just pointing out the practical aspects of it. So, though that censorship is from the Japanese side, I don't know. I don't know if it is from the Japanese, because usually the Japanese don't censor it like that, though. But that's just the otakus being upset. They have less fat material. The skirt literally exposed her butt. Well, yeah, but again, I'm not. And here's the thing I'm saying too. In the case of whether you're performing as an idol and like you're doing a lot of dancing and on stage, or even if you're in this case being a hero, you're doing a lot of fighting. Okay, having less clothes like that is actually a good thing, because it helps you to be more mobile and more maneuverable. You don't want to be weighed down. You don't want like having sometimes having if you have tight pants on, or you have a skirt or something like that, that's going to cut down on your mobility there and your maneuverability. It's going to cut down on your ability to move around. So, hey, Metal, it is from the Japanese studio. They censor preemptively with Western global audiences in mind. We've seen this a lot lately. Oh yeah, you are right there, Metal. I think they have been doing it that more, particularly for the shows that are that they're basically trying to promote worldwide, like My Hero Academia and stuff like that. But so I guess I get your point there. Anyways, Unfortunately, while such an outfit is nothing out of the ordinary for both Eastern and Western media, and brother, after all, she's essentially dressed as Shylock if she were a sailor guardian. Okay. There's an It appears that whether according to their own sensibilities or in deference to puritanical Western audiences, and and it would be the latter there, that Metal just pointed out. Studio Bones has unfortunately deemed Pop Star's original costume to be, in smaller quotes, too spicy for Vigilante's viewers. But then again, who is it aimed at? You know, who is it really aimed at though? Is it you know I would think that My Hero Academia overall, no matter which portion of the franchise is aimed at 13 and up, at the latest 15 and up. 15 and up, maybe 13, you could argue 13 and up. So is that really, I can see some people arguing that might be too spicy for a 13-year-old, but for a 15-year-old, I don't know, especially in considering in Japanese culture, in many ways, I think, and Metal, you could probably speak more to this than I could. You probably know a little bit more about that aspect than I do, but I think in a lot of ways in Japanese culture, at least from what I've seen, 15 is kind of considered adult. Because I think, at least last I knew, compulsory education ends at 15. Usually, 15 is usually when you graduate, like junior high, middle school, and then going to you're not necessarily required to go to senior high school as we might call it here in the States. You don't have to continue on to 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. You can either go into a vocational school, or you can go out and get a job, or go into some other form of training to, you're not necessarily, as far as I know, after, once you turn 15, you're not necessarily compelled to stay in school until you're like 18 or something like that, like here in the States. So, but again, I'm sure Metal, if you may want to comment on what I just said there, feel free to. But anyways, getting back to the article here. Oh, and it looks like it's more that it is considered adulthood. 15 is kind of a no man's land that is treated a bit in both categories. It's more that 16 is considered adulthood. 15 is kind of a no man's land. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, I'm going based off of what I know from like the Japanese school, from what I had read up. And granted, my information might be slightly outdated too, but as I understand it, 15 is usually when you graduate middle school, and then from that point on, you're not necessarily it's not compulsory for you to continue education. You could continue, instead of actually being outright required to attend senior high school like here in the States, you have the option of going to high school or senior high school if you wanted to. You could also at that point go to, once you graduate middle school, you have the option if you want to go into like a vocational training program, like a nursing program, or you want to train to become a priestess, a Shinto priestess or something like that. Or, you wanted to actually go out and get a job, I think you can even, as far as I know, in Japan, at 16, you could even go to college if you instead of like going on to high school. If you wanted to, well, I guess you would in order to go to college, you'd still need to go to high school. That would be like continuing education, I guess. But I think you have other options that you could do. You're not necessarily it's not compulsory to continue your academic career at that point. Oh, actually, you added something to what you said before there. But then again, vigilante isn't considered risque for the general shonen demo 10 plus. Rule number one in manga is don't treat kids like kids. They are individuals. Culturally, they treat it very differently than we do. Yeah. And that's I think one of the points I was trying to get at, Metal, is that their culture is different. I would say if you were to look at a 15-year-old Japanese kid, a 15-year-old kid who grew up in Japan, you compare them to a 15-year-old kid here in the States. Now I'm basing this off of what I've seen in, of course, anime and manga. Okay, so it might be a little bit more fantastical here, but I would almost get the impression that a 15-year-old Japanese kid well, whether you want to call them kid or young adult or whatever, that's your prerogative as well. But a 15-year-old Japanese individual and a 15-year-old American individual, I would say the Japanese 15-year-old is probably more likely more mature and more ready for the adult world than a 15-year-old American is. Just my take based on what I've seen. But anyways, back to the article here. So, concerns regarding the heroine's potential for censorship first arose on January 22nd, when in reviewing that day's release of Vigilante's key character visuals, fans noticed that Pop Step's costume had been drastically toned down compared to its depiction in the original manga, with her, in smaller quotes, cleavage heart, uncensored, or I'm sorry, not uncensored, but unsmaller quoted, being moved up and shrunk, her unitard bottom half being extended in order to conceal her butt, her legs covered by a pair of gray tights, and her boots replaced with ones that cover up considering more of her tight. Yeah, I wouldn't get, okay, again, with the more of her thighs. Again, putting more clothing on her might be a bit more restrictive. I'd say from a practical point of view, right? More from a practical point of view. I'm not talking about the sexual aspects or anything like that. I'm just talking about just in the fact that as a hero, she's constantly fighting criminals. There's a lot of hand-to-hand combat going on here. And I would say that from a practical point of view, in that, more clothes, more tight clothes would actually restrict your movement and make it harder to fight, It would restrict your movements, because in some respects, in some respect, and here's the other thing they'd have to worry about too, if you think about it. If we're looking at this almost from a reality point of view, somebody fighting in something that tight like that would probably rip, and then they'd have the whole thing of well, the costume's ripping apart and exposing stuff anyways. Anyways, let's see. You guys have a couple more things to say here. So I'd say the average 15-year-old Japanese youth is probably about as mature as the average 20-year U.S. adults. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. I could see that. I think I also, as you were pointing out before too, Metal, I think in Japanese culture, they actually seem to make it more that way because if you think about it, I mean, I've as Metal, as you know, I've seen my fair share of slice of life animes, and the things I've seen in a lot of them, particularly the school based ones, is that whereas here in the States, the teachers are assigned one room and they have kids rotating in and out of the rooms. In Japanese culture, it's the other way. The kids are actually assigned the room and therefore also assigned to care for the room and all that, while the teachers rotate in and out. Teachers have a staff room they go to where they have their desks and they prepare their materials and bring them to the classroom. But the kids are placed in response. So yeah, so it's kind of like that. And then of course they usually are allowed after school, of course, to use the rooms for club activities, in which they have why they do have an advisor. The advisor's not really doesn't really do much, but just try to get them, try to help them out, get them over some humps if there are some humps. Putting more clothing on her isn't restrictive at all if it's skin tight. Well, it could be it could be though. Skin tight, it could be restricted because if you think about it, it's skin tight. That means it's tight on the skin. That means that let's say she goes for a kick, right? She goes for a kick and let's say she goes for a roundhouse kick or like or just a straight side kick, right? There's a good chance that the first off that thing's going to the material is going to rip, and then they're going to have the very problem that they were trying to avoid in the first place. Figure skaters wear full body costumes all time in real life. I saw yeah, but figure skaters are not continuously doing fighting scenes either. Okay, yeah, they are dancing and but again, it's there is a practical side to it. But anyways, let's see what I saw the changes before the show and don't see an issue myself. If anything, it might be a backfire because adding hosing can be sexier than leaving the leg bare. Yeah, you make you make a good point there, and with what Joseph just said about the skin tight aspect of it, that's true too. Sometimes skin tight that as you said, that could backfire on them, where if they're trying to tone the costume down, they may have just ramped it up instead. So that's a good point there too. Let's see, where were we? Oh yeah. In other words, Studio Bones had chosen to intentionally and drastically contradict the in-universe fact that Kazuho created the suit specifically to be as flashy and attention-grabbing as possible as a way to defy her own shy personality. Yeah, and when taking it in that context, again, that's again another no. That's like and taking in that if she's already kind of a locked in or closed in person, and then she's doing this to come out of her shell, and then you're basically telling her, no, you have to go back into your shell. Yeah, I could see that kind of thing being asked. Given the discrepancy between the censorship and the fact that, in theory, the series had more creative freedom, due to airing in a later time slot in Japan, many fans took to hoping that Popstep's new suit was only meant to appear on the series' widely distributed preview visuals. Sadly, their optimism would ultimately be crushed when, on April 7th, Vigilantes premiered with a covered-up Popstep front and center. At current, neither Studio Bones nor anyone involved with the anime's production have offered a public explanation regarding the decision to alter Popstep's costume. Further, neither Furuhashi nor Betancourt have offered any public comment on the matter. As I said with the, as I reminded everybody in the last article we read too, the mangakas probably aren't even aware yet that the changes have been made. They're usually the last ones to find out that somebody changed your work. So until somebody maybe writes them and says, hey, they changed this is this is this how you were intending them to be dressed, or it's fiction in a visual medium, practically in either direction. Doesn't matter as much as character design. The creators could choose for clothes to never tear, no matter what they put on them. Yeah, that's true too. Again, I'm just offering counterpoints, Metal. I'm offering counterpoints to kind of get a discussion going. Get people thinking. And I am really glad that you two are in fact contributing to the conversation. This is a pretty good conversation we're having here. So I like the back and forth. This is what I always strive for whenever I do these shows, right? Is to have this back and forth, to get people engaged, get people thinking, and communicating their thoughts and ideas and their perspective. We may not always agree, or we may not always see the same things, but that's what the beautiful thing about this whole experience is it broadens one's perspective by sharing your perspective with others. So we don't have to ultimately agree at the end of the day, but it's still a good thing to try to open people up to things. Anyways, continuing on, let's see. What more do we have here? And then finishing up here, for those interested in seeing the world of My Hero Academia from a more street level angle, same day simulcast and simuldubs for Vigilantes are currently releasing every Monday via Crunchyroll. All right, so there we go with that. So those are the only two articles we're going to do tonight. Let's see. Wow, we're already... So that article in of itself took quite a bit of time with all the discussion. So longer than I actually initially intended for it, but that's okay. It's still a good thing. So anyways, now we're going to move on to the wrestling wrap-up here. Going to move on to the wrestling wrap-up as we're going to look back to last night's... of course, we're going to take a look back at last night's WWE Raw. Going to look back to the results as well as talk. There's a couple more matches that were added to the Backlash pay-per-view coming up a week from this Saturday. So let's talk a bit about that. So the show opened up with a. I have no interest in My Hero Academia. Well, again, they just put it out there if you wanted to watch it. That's the whole idea there. That show them. Anyway, so last night's Monday Night Raw did start off with a confrontation between Sami Zayn and Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins' new little subgroup with Paul Heyman and Braun Breaker, in which Zayn kind of confronted, Rollins. Rollins recent change to heel. In essence, what ended up happening is Rollins essentially saying that he still wanted to be friends with Sammy. He realized that Sammy wasn't going to get on board with what he was going to be doing. So he was like kind of honoring, well, till sun, you have the whole angle of, well, you have till sunset to get out of town kind of thing, by saying, try to arrange a move over to SmackDown. So that would eventually set up a match later in the evening, the main event, of course, between Sami Zayn and Braun Breaker. The first match of the evening took place as former WWE Women's World Champion Rhea Ripley defeated Roxanne Perez via disqualification when Julia came out and interfered in the match. It was revealed last night that that Roxanne Perez and Julia have now been called up to the main roster from NXT, so they're now officially on Raw as members of the Raw brand. Of course, as Julia and Roxanne were going after Ripley, current WWE Women's World Champion Io Sky came out to save Sky from the attack. The next match saw former WWE World Tag Team Champion, the War Raiders, Eric and Ivar, fend off the Judgment Day duo of Finn Balor and JD McDonough as Carlito was trying to get the referee's attention for Penta came out and turned the tides for the War Raiders to help them get the win. The non-title match, NXT Women's Champion Stephanie McCure defeated Ivy Nile in a singles match, who had, of course, Chad Gable in her corner. And as we said in the main event, Braun Breaker defeated Sami Zayn via referee's decision when in essence Breaker beat Zayn down to the point to where he just couldn't continue. Now, a couple other interesting news points came up in terms of a couple matches being added to Backlash. So the one match that was the first match that was added to Backlash after what happened on last week's Raw, in which Gunther had initially attacked Michael Cole and then Pat McAfee, as Pat McAfee was trying to defend Cole. McAfee got on the announce table to do a promo, saying he wants Gunther in a match. Called out the temporary GM for the night, Nick Aldis, and Aldis had claimed that he had talked to Adam Pearce, but Pearce was going to be off for the night for whatever reason. But set up for Backlash, a match between Gunther and Pat McAfee. And then also on the night, a confrontation between current WWE Women's Intercontinental Champion Lyra Valkyrie and Becky Lynch. The two of them ended up the two of them, and it had a confrontation which now signed for Backlash, and this is the first time since its inception that this will be happening. Lyra Valkyria will be defending the WWE Women's Intercontinental title against Becky Lynch at Backlash. This is the first time that the Women's Intercontinental title has been defended on a pay-per-view since its inception. And let's see what you said here. For the record, I can only name 3 shonen properties aimed at 10-year-olds, and two are over 20 years old. Yeah. Well, obviously though, you probably haven't watched as many as maybe. I mean, well, I guess you could. Yeah, I'd say most shonen that most people know of are aimed more like at 13 and up, not necessarily 10 and up. 13 and up, like so I can see your point there, it shows though. But anyways, so yeah, so that all happened on last night's Monday night Raw. Now looking ahead to, of course, tonight's NXT on the CW. On the CW tonight, NXT's on tonight's NXT, which comes from the Performance Center in Orlando. Already signed for tonight's show. Ricky, they're still okay. I think it's supposed to be Ricky Saints, actually, not Ricky Stark, but Ricky Saints will be defending the NXT North American title against Lexis King, and Hank and Tank defend the NXT Tag Team title against Josh Briggs and Yoshiki Inamura. So those two matches are those two matches are up for tonight. So with that, that's all I got for the wrestling wrap up. So now what we're going to do, of course, with today being Tuesday, April the 29th, 2025. Let's take a look back at this day. Niche history. History! Oh, and Metal, if you're still here, so it was 20 years ago Sunday that Felix Outwit's Cupid was released, or I'm sorry, 100 years ago Sunday that Felix Outwit's Cupid, not yesterday. I know you said on your show yesterday, but it was actually 100 years ago this past Sunday, just so you know. Anyways, 2015, 2000, and 1935. All right, so with that being said, let's take a look back at this day in Niche history. History! So, on this date, 90 years ago today, this date 90 years ago today, from Walter Lantz Productions, the Oswald short Elmer the Great Dane premiered in theaters on this date back in 1935. Let's see. The storyline saw Oswald's placid night of sleep is interrupted when the dog under his bed comes down with a severe case of the hiccups. Now it's time for him to try a succession of home remedies on the canine's affliction in order to resume his sleep. So on this date, 90 years ago today, Oswald Rabbit's Elmer the Great Dane premiered in theaters on this date in I'm going to be streaming on my channel very soon. All right. Well, all right. So with that, let's move on to the next piece in each history here. As we move ahead to the year 2000, as on this date in the year 2000, the wrestling promotion Extreme, spelled with an X, XTREME, Extreme Pro Wrestling, held its heavyweight title tournament on this date in the year 2000. The first round matches included the Messiah defeating Johnny Webb, Damian Steele defeating Carlito Montana, Sabu defeating John Cronus in a battle of two former ECW stars. Now, for those of you who don't know, XPW, Extreme Pro Wrestling, was kind of the West Coast version of ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. This is around the time when ECW was kind of on the downturn. A lot of their talent was leaving for like WWE or WCW. XPW was kind of on the West Coast, kind of trying to fill that void. Axel Rotten Homeless Jimmy wrestled to a no contest. And then as in the second round matches, Sabu defeated Damian Steele. Public Enemy defeated Kid Chaos, and Steve Rosano, and the West Siders. Now I know, yes, it says something a little different there, but they were called the West Siders so they wouldn't get into trouble. But in a three-way dance, and in the final, the main event of the evening, so the finals of the XPW World Heavyweight Title Tournament, which Sabu defeated Messiah to become the first XPW World Heavyweight Champion. So there we go with that one. Now we shall move on to the last piece in each history for the evening, which we move ahead to the year 2015. On this date, 10 years ago today. This date 10 years ago today in 2015. Saw the 40th issue of the second volume of Batman go on sale on newsstands on this date back in 2015. The part 6 of the Endgame storyline, written by Scott Snyder, penciled by Greg Capullo, Danny K. Miki did the inking, Steve Wands did the lettering, and then the Francisco Placencia did the coloring. So with that, I thank everybody for being here tonight. Hope everybody enjoyed the show. I think we had a pretty good discussion on some things there. With that, I hope everybody enjoyed the show. As I said, back with more Niche News tomorrow. This Sunday, of course, I'll have RJ Carter joining me as we'll be taking a look back. The comics went on sale in May of 1940. We'll be focusing in on Fiction House. With that, I thank everybody for being here, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.